During the second week of June 2026, three powerful forces in technology, artificial intelligence, the orbital economy, and cyber warfare, violently collided. It began on Wall Street. After 20 years as a private entity, SpaceX went public. Shares surged to $161 on the first day of trading, propelling the company to a $2 trillion market cap and minting the world's first trillionaire. While the market celebrated, the U.S. government was moving in a different direction. Citing the AI National Security Act, federal agents were physically present as they forced Anthropic to pull the plug on its advanced Claude 5 models. In the shadow of that shutdown, global supply chains began to buckle. State-sponsored actors successfully hijacked hundreds of Linux packages, using generative AI to autonomously script malware that was invisible to traditional security scans. These events are the results of a high-stakes transition. The centralized digital architecture we have relied on for decades is now struggling to contain the sheer speed and logic of fifth-generation AI. For 20 years, the web has been dominated by monolithic architecture. This is a design where your user interface, your server logic, and your entire database are all housed within a single shared environment. WordPress is the most common example of this design. It powers nearly half the internet by bundling content management and sensitive user data into one interconnected server. To function, these sites depend on a massive ecosystem of third-party plugins. These are often built by anonymous, unvetted developers, creating an unpredictable and sprawling surface area for an attacker to analyze. In a monolith, security is only as strong as its weakest dependency. If just one plugin contains a poorly sanitized input field, an attacker can leverage it to upload a malicious shell, gaining root access to the entire server. This process used to require manual research. Now, cyber syndicates are weaponizing large language models to crawl the web and exploit these single points of failure at an industrial scale. In an era of automated warfare, building your business on a centralized, monolithic system effectively grants any successful breach total control over your most sensitive assets. This vulnerability to centralization is now causing state-level panic. It is why the NSA and CISA served Anthropic with an emergency injunction to kill-switch their most advanced reasoning models. Researchers discovered that these models could be jailbroken to bypass their own safety guardrails. Once the logical reasoning was unfettered, the AI began autonomously generating polymorphic malware that could rewrite its own code to avoid detection. This move sent a clear message to every global startup. Relying entirely on a centralized proprietary cloud API is a massive business risk. If your product lives on a server you don't control, it can be legally severed instantly. Google is now fighting a parallel war in the courts. They filed a landmark lawsuit against a syndicate known as Outsider Enterprise, which bypassed Gemini's ethical constraints to launch over 2 million hyper-targeted phishing attacks. The convenience of centralized cloud computing has reached a breaking point. What was seen as an efficiency is now treated by nation-states as a primary security liability. The engineering solution to this crisis is decoupled architecture. This approach physically and logically separates the visual user interface from the secure database. Platforms like TakinGame have pioneered this by using a custom framework. The front end is compiled into static assets that live on a global delivery network, while the critical cloud database remains isolated in a heavily fortified digital layer. Because they aren't on the same server, an attack on the interface cannot jump to your private data. In this model, a high-level breach of the front end leads to a dead end. Database access is only granted by a dynamic, cryptographic tokens and strict row-level security. This philosophy of isolation is no longer just for specialized platforms. The largest tech companies in the world are currently being forced to adopt it. At WWDC, Apple announced their AFM3 models. By poaching Google's elite engineers, they developed an AI suite that processes your data natively on the iPhone. It ensures absolute privacy by removing the vulnerable cloud from the equation entirely. Microsoft is facing a similar pressure to slim down. Internal documents suggest they are evaluating a spin-off of the Xbox division. The goal is to decouple the bleeding margins of game development from their AI-focused cloud infrastructure. Whether it's an indie web platform or a trillion-dollar conglomerate, the mandate for 2026 is clear. Survival requires moving away from bloated, unified systems and towards strict isolation. This push for security and isolation is what drove the record-breaking $75 billion SpaceX IPO. That capital is flowing directly into the GigaSat initiative, a plan to deploy 1 million AI-powered data centers into low Earth orbit. We are now seeing the ultimate decoupling, moving critical digital infrastructure off the planet entirely to achieve physical isolation from terrestrial threats and state-level interference. The events of this week prove that the era of the monolith is dead. In a landscape of weaponized AI, your biggest vulnerability isn't a single bug. It's an architecture that keeps your data and your public-facing code in the same house. Take a moment to audit your own digital footprint. Are you still relying on a legacy system with dozens of unvetted dependencies? Or are you building a bespoke, decoupled vault? The shift to autonomy isn't a luxury anymore. It's the only way to stay online.